Hi, I'm Lori Palmquist, and in this video I'm going to be demonstrating all of the components, the drip components that hook up from the hose bib or spigot from the house all the way out to the veggie garden for the drip system in the veggie garden. So let's go ahead and get started with this, and let me show you what these parts are. All right, these are the components that I showed you fully assembled before. I've taken them all apart. We'll start at the hose bib. This is a hose bib or a spigot, and you would be hooking up these components to a hose bib that's maybe it's off the back of the house, maybe it's off the garage, maybe it comes off a hose bib that's just on a riser out in the garden somewhere. So this is the beginning of the system. And what a lot of people like to do, and this is a really good idea, is to put on what we call a Y fitting. And the Y fitting makes it so that, I'll go ahead and put this on here. The Y fitting makes it so that you can have your drip system coming off one side of it and a hose coming off the other side of it. So, because if you were to dedicate this whole hose bib to your drip system and you ever wanted to put a hose on there, you'd be taking it on and off and on and off. So the Y is or splitter, sometimes they're called splitters. The Y is a really good idea. Now I'm actually going to take this off because it's easier to assemble the parts without this Y on there. Now I would like to say something about the types of threads that we have here. And we have hose threads and we have pipe threads. There are two different kinds of threads that are used for irrigation components. This particular component, this hose bib, has pipe threads on one side and hose threads on the other side. And it can be hard to tell the pipe thread apart from the hose thread. They are microns in difference, just a couple of micron difference in the spacing between the threads. And then the hose threads are very slightly slanted or canted. Now if you were to try and screw on, so let's see here. We have a hose threaded component, hose threaded, and then these guys are all pipe threads. So we have to be really careful about the components that we buy and the order that we put them in and what we screw into what. Because if you were to screw a pipe threaded component into a hose threaded component, like if I were to put these together and then start screwing it on, one of these components would get stripped. One of these threads would get stripped because they're different kinds of threads. And once you strip the threads, you can't take it back to the store and say, oh, this is defective, because they'll know that you stripped the threads. So what you'd have to do is buy a whole new component. So be really careful about what you screw together to what. And this is one of the reasons that we recommend very strongly that you buy your irrigation components at a professional irrigation store. And this is because they'll help you gather up the parts, and they will help you screw them on together in the right, facing in the right direction, and also they'll help you with knowing which are hose threads and which are pipe threads so that you don't get that wrong as to what you screw together. Another thing, another difference between hose threads and pipe threads is that hose threaded components have gaskets in them to keep them from leaking, and pipe threaded components have Teflon tape on them to keep them from leaking. So for instance, let's see, I have this adapter here, which I'll be talking about in just a few minutes. You can see that there's a black gasket inside there, and that is the hose threaded part of this. And this is actually an adapter that allows you to go from hose thread to pipe thread, and you can see the hose threaded side has the gasket inside it, whereas the pipe threaded side does not. So pipe threads get Teflon tape, and we usually will do about four or five wraps of Teflon tape, and I'll just go ahead and demonstrate that to you real quickly here. This takes some dexterity, by the way. I'll do this one. This is a little easier. You wrap the Teflon tape on in the direction that you would be screwing it into another component. And we just do about 4 or 5 wraps and break it off, and we're good. So there's our Teflon tape on the pipe threads there. All right, so we started with the hose bib. The next thing that we would bring in after the Y, so I already told you about the Y, but I'm not going to put the Y on because, why? I'm not going to put the Y on because as I assemble these and put them together, that Y makes it really cumbersome to hold on to. So I'm going to go ahead and leave the Y off for now. The next component after the hose bib is a vacuum breaker. So this is a vacuum breaker, and this is hose threaded. So spigot or hose bib, hose threaded. So this vacuum breaker is hose threaded, and this keeps the water from siphoning back out into the public water supply and the water supply from your house when the system turns off. So this is actually required by every city's health and safety code. So you should have these vacuum breakers on your hose bibs anyway. So I'll go ahead and put this on here. Wonderful. So we've got the spigot so far and the vacuum breaker. The next thing in line is our battery operated timer. This one is a dig battery operated timer, and these usually operate off of either 2 AA batteries or a 9-volt battery, and they're quite reliable. I really like these timers. They last forever, and they're quite reliable as long as you make sure that the battery is still live. So this is the next thing that we have on here, and this is hose threaded as well, and there is a gasket inside there. Now, something that I should say too is that if you have a hose threaded component and it has a gasket in there, don't put Teflon tape on as well, because it's likely to leak if you have a gasket and Teflon tape. So the gasket should do the trick for us. Let me go ahead and screw this on. Whoops, that's kind of loud. Let's get that together. Okay, very nice. So now we've got the spigot or hose bib, the vacuum breaker, and the battery operated timer. The next thing that we need to do, and I'm going to set these down, is we have a filter which is next, but the filter actually has pipe threads and the battery operated timer has hose threads. So what we need is an adapter, and that's what this metal piece is it's an adapter that takes it from hose thread to pipe thread. So on the hose thread side, there's our gasket. So I would put this one on here. There. And then the filter is pipe threaded. So we have our adapter. All right, so this drip filter, and you'll find that there are different looks and configurations to these drip filters. And this one is a filter and a pressure regulator all in one. And a lot of times you'll see a filter that is separate from a pressure regulator, but we need both. We need the filter and then we need the pressure regulator. So these units, this is a Rainbird actually, so these devices that have both built in are actually pretty nice because it's just one component to deal with instead of two. And with this filter, what we want to do is we want to pull out the filter and just wash it. Wash it, I would say, at least a couple of times a year. And if you tend to have kind of dirty water, or if they end up doing any work on the water main out on the street, then you'll want to clean the filter then. But we say a couple of times a year should be fine. So go ahead and take that out and clean the filter. So then now we've got the filter here, and the next one in line is our, okay. So now we have our adapter. So this adapter is what we're ultimately going to put our solid drip tubing on, and then run that solid drip tubing out to the veggie beds. And usually when you see this brown tubing, usually it has emitters built into it, but this happens to be a blank tubing version of that brown tubing. So this is the blank tubing that we would end up putting on the end here. So then what this guy is, it's called a male adapter, a barbed male adapter. And we need to add it on after the filter and pressure regulator, but you can see that we've got two components with male threads. So I know I don't need to explain to you the difference between male and female threads, but male threads here, we've got two things with male threads. And then actually this guy really needs to have the Teflon tape. This end would need the Teflon tape as well. So we need to put these guys together. So what we're going to use is a coupling that has female threads on both sides. And that lets us put these two male threaded components together. All right. And there, yeah, there we have it. All right. And that is fully assembled. So I do want to show you something here that I like to say that this is going to change your life. So this is something, this is a trick of screwing two things together that once I discovered it, it truly did change my life. So hopefully this will change your life, and you haven't heard about this before. So anytime you want to screw two things together, what you do, now it could be irrigation components, it could be in the kitchen, it could be in the shop, just screwing two things together. What you do is you put them together and then you screw it backwards until you either hear or feel a click. Now I'll go ahead and do this and let's see, and sometimes it's both, you hear it and you feel it. So let's see here. Ah, that was a good one. All right, so once you feel or hear that click, now you can go ahead and screw it together, because the click means that the threads are now lined up and you're not going to strip any threads when you screw them together. So let me put this guy back in here. Excellent. All right, so now we have our whole system set up. Face these guys in the right direction. We've got our hose bib. We've got our vacuum breaker. We've got our battery operated timer. We've got our adapter that takes us from hose threads to pipe threads. We have our filter, and we have our pressure regulator. Oh, and I forgot to say that this white dot here is the pressure regulator in this component. So the filter is here and the pressure regulator is here. And then we have a coupling that allows us to screw these two male threaded components together. And then last but not least, we've got our blank tubing that we go ahead and fit onto the end of this, and we would push it all the way up to the end. And oftentimes, if you're not quite strong enough to get that on, you can rock it back and forth, and dipping it in hot, really hot or boiling water really helps with this. So we often have boiling water in a coffee cup out on the landscape with us so that we can get these components fit together more easily. Okay, so that concludes this demonstration of the components that go at the hose bib for the drip system that runs out to the veggie beds. Well, I hope you learned something, and I hope you enjoyed the explanation of the components that start at the hose bib and end up running all the way out to the veggie beds. Enjoy and have a wonderful garden.